This is DGMT's Learning Lunch, and I'm your host, Rahima. Strategic litigation is a powerful tool in an NGO's arsenal. If you are listening to this podcast and you are not familiar with the term, strategic litigation is essentially when you take legal action to address a particular issue, often to challenge a government decision, a policy, or a law that's unjust. Now, South Africa has no shortage of examples where government or its entities have been taken to court over their decisions. The most notable example is the Treatment Action Campaign, better known as the TAC. In the early 2000s, TAC took the government to court arguing that the failure to provide life-saving HIV/AIDS treatment was a violation of people's constitutional rights. The legal battle was long and hard-fought, but in the end, TAC won, and it was a pivotal victory, one that has shaped our history and law books. And that's where today's guest comes in. We're joined by Zimasa Mpemnyama, project lead of DGMT's Alcohol Harms Reduction campaign, relaunched as Rethink Your Drink. This campaign uses strategic litigation to challenge unlawful liquor laws, one municipality and province at a time, but with a big picture objective to shape national policy and our country's approach to regulating alcohol sales. This is all with the goal of lessening the health, economic and social burden of heavy and binge drinking. Welcome, Zimasa. It's so nice to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to discuss this very important topic.
Zimasa, let's start by talking about the Rethink Your Drink campaign. Let's call it by its new name. Can you share a bit more about the main objectives of this campaign and what you were hoping to achieve?
Okay, sure. So Rethink Your Drink is fundamentally about reducing the harmful impact of binge and heavy drinking in South Africa. And we do this by aligning our efforts with the World Health Organization's 5 Best Buys, which are a globally recognized set of cost-effective and evidence-based policy interventions to reduce alcohol consumption and its negative societal impacts. So our objectives are twofold. One, to advocate for an improved policy and regulatory environment that reduces alcohol-related harm. And two, to create a broader national movement that shifts societal attitudes towards heavy alcohol consumption. So we aim to push for policy changes at the national and local levels to ensure that public health and safety are prioritized over profits.
In your response, you mentioned that one of the objectives is to shift societal attitudes about heavy and binge drinking. Why? Why is that important in the South African context?
Okay, so South Africa is a nation of heavy drinkers. We have some of the highest numbers of binge and heavy drinking across Africa and across the world. And this places a very heavy burden on our health system. And lastly, we have a history of advertising alcohol that makes alcohol use appealing and aspirational, especially for young people. And so we want to shift those social norms.
Zimasa, that's really useful to understand the context that we're in. One of the core issues this campaign is tackling is alcohol regulation in South Africa. Why do you think there's a need for a stricter regulatory system for alcohol at a national level?
There's a significant gap between what we know about alcohol-related harms, that is what we're seeing in our communities, and how we regulate alcohol trading and advertising in South Africa. So currently we're seeing inconsistencies across provinces and municipalities. We're seeing a lack of enforcement, and in some cases we are seeing policy reversals that favor industry interests over public health. And so even though there's mounting global and local evidence that shows the devastating impacts of binge drinking, we're still seeing municipalities and provinces and even national government that is increasing trading hours. We're seeing lackluster consultation with communities. We're seeing the awarding of trading licenses in places where there's too many alcohol outlets anyway. We're seeing young people being allowed to drink in spaces and being sold alcohol. And so the consequences for this are real. So South Africa, as I said, has high binge drinking rates, which contributes to alcohol-related violence and road accidents. So a national regulatory framework would create consistency, it would close loopholes, and ensure that alcohol policy aligns with evidence-based harms reduction strategies. So we need to shift the way in which we are regulating alcohol currently.
I'm curious, Zimasa, why are municipalities and provinces deciding to allow alcohol outlets like taverns, restaurants, bars, and even clubs to sell alcohol for longer periods, sometimes late into the night?
Provinces and municipalities essentially want to drive economic activity because largely we've seen how the industry pushes the narrative that alcohol drives greater economic outputs. But research shows that the longer you trade for, you are burdening the health system, you are creating social harms, and the public safety is at risk. So I don't think that municipalities and provinces consider this aspect of the economic burden that alcohol comes with.
So what problems are we seeing with our current legal framework?
So our current legal framework is fragmented and again poorly enforced. We see some provincial liquor acts that have been passed but never implemented. Some get stuck at the regulatory impact assessment level but never move forward. And at the national level, the Draft Liquor Amendment Bill of 2016, which proposed important reforms like restricting alcohol advertising and raising the legal drinking age, has stalled completely. Another example is the 2020 repeal of stricter warning labels for alcohol packaging, which was a direct result of industry lobbying. So these failures and others show that while we have policies on paper, their implementation remains a challenge.
Thanks, Zimasa. This is useful in sort of painting a picture of our context and just giving me and my listeners a better understanding of why this campaign exists. Just to summarize, you were saying that South Africa has a heavy drinking and binge drinking problem, that municipalities and provinces are making it easier for liquor outlets to sell alcohol for longer time frames, so expanding their liquor trading hours, that advertisers are targeting young people by making alcohol use aspirational and appealing. This all makes sense. Why then is the campaign focused on strategic litigation as a core part of its approach?
Sure. So strategic litigation for us became essential as an additional form of advocacy. So alongside our research, alongside our lobbying, alongside our now public awareness campaigns and public education campaigns that we want to embark on, we view strategic litigation as essential. Strategic litigation is geared towards influencing broader societal change at the level of law, policy, practice, and social discourse. Our theory of change is that legal interventions can force action where there is government inaction or industry overreach. So litigation can hold the state accountable when it fails to enact or enforce regulations. 2, it can challenge industry practices that contribute to alcohol harms. And 3, it can set legal precedents that strengthen future public health regulations. So we've seen how litigation in other public health areas like tobacco control and HIV/AIDS treatment has successfully driven policy change. So our campaign applies the same principles to alcohol regulation.
And you've had successes with this strategy. Tell me about your recent legal wins and what these victories mean for pending and future cases.
So a significant legal victory for us was the court ruling against the Kanaland municipality in the Western Cape about them extending their liquor trading hours to 4 a.m. in the morning. So the court found that the new bylaws extending trading hours was unconstitutional, and they reinstated a 2013 bylaw which had stricter trading hours. This case set an important precedent that local government cannot arbitrarily expand alcohol availability without considering public health and safety implications. So we are currently in the process of litigating against the Northern Cape government, which also increased trading hours, specifically for clubs till around 6 a.m. in the morning. But generally what we want these cases to do is to send a strong message to policymakers that they must uphold public health and safety in policymaking as is ascribed in the Constitution of South Africa.
Absolutely. Now I've got a lighter question for you. Zimasa, do you speak legalese? I mean, when you are dealing with strategic litigation, how much of a difference does it make to have some legal knowledge yourself along with a really good legal team or team of advisors?
So that question made me chuckle a little bit. I definitely wouldn't call myself a legal expert or a person who speaks legalese, as you say, but I've certainly had to become familiar with some legal concepts. I've had to create an understanding of the basics of constitutional law, constitutional rights, and the regulatory frameworks. And this has been crucial, working with our legal team to make informed decisions. So they have advised us on certain items and kind of create a working relationship where they explain things very clearly to us who don't speak legalese. So having a strong legal team or advisors is absolutely necessary because they help navigate complex legal terrains and they craft arguments that can stand up in court.
For those listening to the podcast who might be interested in this approach or strategy, some might be thinking, whoa, this sounds too complicated. I don't understand certain aspects of the law. I don't know how to go about this. So it's good to know in terms of your own experience where you're at and just what the kind of people that you need to surround yourself with, and that you don't have to be a legal expert. Let's take a step back for a moment. For NGOs that are thinking about using strategic litigation, what would you say are the principles that determine whether going to court is the best course of action?
There are a few principles that NGOs need to consider. One, that is legal merit. So you must ask yourself, does the case have a strong basis in law? Secondly is public interest. So will a legal victory benefit broader society and not just the people that are litigating? Also, three, you must consider strategic timing. So is strategic litigation the most effective intervention at this stage, or are there other alternative advocacy avenues that you can pursue? Four, you must think around resource capacity. Litigation is an expensive exercise and it is time consuming. So NGOs must assess whether they have the funding and expertise to sustain a case. What we've seen internationally is that companies, especially industry companies like tobacco, in the tobacco case, they put in a lot of money behind litigation and extend cases for long periods of time, knowing that NGOs and civil society can't fund an excessively long case. So one must consider this as a risk to litigation. And lastly, you must make a risk assessment before you go ahead. So you must think, what are the potential unintended consequences of litigation, such as backlash or negative precedents? Or also, if you don't end up winning the case, what happens then? So in our case, looking at all the principles that I just set out, we saw that litigation was a necessary tool when regulatory and policy channels failed to produce action that we required.
Are you sure you're not a legal expert? I think the experiences really help to improve your knowledge about the law. So just to recap, it was whether the case has legal merit. Think about the timing. Think about whether you have the resources internally, because cases can be very expensive. Does the case have a public benefit? And lastly, do a risk assessment to determine whether this is the right course of action. Why is litigation sometimes the right path instead of solely focusing on one strategy, like advocacy, for instance?
So I think lobbying and media campaigns are essential, but they often rely on political will, which can be unpredictable. So litigation, on the other hand, forces a legal ruling that decision makers must abide by. So I'll make an example here that you mentioned in the beginning, which is the TAC case around HIV and AIDS medications, and internationally the tobacco lobby around tobacco advertising, which also existed in South Africa. So these cases show that once litigation is won, you can force governments to abide by these legal decisions, and that has long-lasting impacts. While acknowledging this, litigation, however, is most powerful when it is combined with other advocacy strategies. So, for instance, if you win a legal victory and you pair that with a strong media campaign and you have build a strong lobby movement behind that, you can shape public opinion and pressure policymakers to act beyond the court ruling.
I appreciate that you keep bringing up the tobacco industry and the work that has been done to regulate the tobacco industry globally and domestically. We are accustomed, and it's become the norm, that there are smoking areas and non-smoking areas. You go to the airport, you can't smoke inside the airport, but we forget that it wasn't that long ago that it was the norm to light up a cigarette in an airplane, which is wild if we think about it now. But that's why they have to remind people when you get on a plane, this is no smoking, not even e-cigarettes are allowed. So that's a very useful reminder about when it comes to shifting societal attitudes, even ways of doing things that seem like, oh, this is never going to change, this is how things are done, can change, and it changes over time, and then you get used to a new way of doing things, as we've become accustomed to with tobacco regulation. In your experience, what does an NGO need in place to navigate the justice system effectively when pursuing a strategy like strategic litigation? Are there specific resources or support systems that can make a real difference?
So what helped us is that we consulted with a legal consultant to sit down and think around alcohol harms reduction in South Africa and whether it would make sense for strategic litigation to be an approach for us in the campaign. And what that produced was a document that is our strategic litigation strategy, which we have been using over the years. So I cannot emphasize enough the need for great legal expertise and partnering with experienced public interest lawyers in the space. There are some that specifically look at environmental issues, some look at public health issues, some look at children's issues. So you need public interest lawyers that have a specific interest in the focus area that we are speaking about. But essentially another resource that you need is funding. We know that the NGO space and civil society space is stretched for funding currently, especially with everything happening internationally. But if one has to consider an important part around litigation strategy, it is definitely funding. It is costly, and NGOs must budget for legal fees, they must budget for research, and they must budget for long court proceedings. Unless they consult pro bono legal services that are available in our sector. So another thing is that you need a clear narrative. You need a compelling story that is backed by evidence that helps boost your argument in court and in public advocacy. For us, obviously, there's clear regulations that are not being upheld by municipalities and provinces, but also this translates to real life stories. This translates to people that we see in our communities that we live with. We see young kids that have fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. We see young people that are heavy drinkers and their futures being affected by their heavy drinking. We see overburdened healthcare clinics and the ways in which our hospitals have to take on the burden of accidents and interpersonal violence that comes through over weekends because of heavy consumption. We see the carnage on the roads, and that is a real life compelling story that can ride along with the strong evidence and the strong legal opinions that we present in court.
Well put, Zimasa. Two things really stood out for me. In the beginning, you said that you intentionally worked with a legal consultant who helped you to essentially build out the framework for how you do strategic litigation, and that was a game changer. And then you also spoke about the narrative and relying on evidence, and I want to touch on that because beyond strategic litigation, the campaign has focused on commissioning research about what is going on in South Africa, but also commissioning research about international examples where alcohol sales were limited, where they introduced policies that reduced heavy and binge drinking. And that was really crucial for supporting the strategic litigation. Tell me more about that.
So I think at the DGMT Trust, we've invested a lot of our energy and time in creating a very coherent evidence base that now we can move forward in our strategic litigation work and in our community mobilization work. So we've spent a lot of resource and time in commissioning research on minimum unit pricing and how it can be implemented in different provinces, and commissioning research on liquor trading hours that specifically show how many lives can be saved if we stick to a national agenda that reduces and is quite strict on trading hours. It has helped us shift perceptions with policymakers, but it has helped us also build relationships with researchers in research institutions like the University of Cape Town and like the South African Medical Research Council, where we can now collaborate and work together in lobbying for the policies that we want to see. So that has been a vital strategy for us in moving forward our campaign.
And lastly, Zimasa, to round off our thought-provoking conversation today, what's next for your campaign?
So I think for us, the most exciting thing currently is relaunching with a different name called Rethink Your Drink, which now has a focus on community mobilization and public awareness and public education around some of the important research that we've done over the years and translating that work into a language that everyone can understand, and therefore hoping to build a coalition or building civil society understanding around the health harms that come with alcohol. So beyond our launch and beyond our litigation work, we are continuing our advocacy with policymakers, researchers, and civil society groups to push for an evidence-based national alcohol agenda. The goal remains reducing alcohol harms and protecting public health.
Thanks, Zimasa. That wraps up our conversation. A huge thank you to you for sharing your insights into the world of strategic litigation and how NGOs can use it to drive social change. From challenging alcohol regulations to creating meaningful policy shifts, it's clear that litigation can be a powerful tool for just achieving social justice. And now, over to you, those listening to this podcast. Using what you have heard today, you can try this reflective exercise. You'll need a pen and paper to write down these steps, or download the takeaway sheet from our website dgmt.co.za and go to the podcast section. Write down the following questions and spend some time reflecting on them by yourself or share them with your colleagues. Question number 1. Does your NGO have a clear legal objective that aligns with the organization's mission? And would litigation be the most effective way to achieve that goal compared to other strategies? Question number 2. What are the potential risks, financial, reputational, or political, of pursuing litigation for your organization? And is your team prepared to navigate these challenges? And question number 3. Aside from strategic litigation as a strategy, how can your NGO drive broader systemic change beyond the courtroom? This was DGMT's Learning Lunch. Until next time.